Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's event. We're so excited to have you for the Diversity in Television event featuring Dr. Eric Pearson, Co-Director of Film Studies and Professor of Communication Studies. My name is Megan O'Rourke, and I'm the Associate Director of Regional Programs for the Office of Alumni Relations at USD. I'm also a member of the class of 2015. I have the pleasure of working with our 23 domestic torero clubs across the country, including the Inland Empire, the Los Angeles and Orange County Torero clubs, who are co-hosting today's program with the College of Arts and Sciences. Although we are physically apart, our amazing club committees are hard at work putting together and supporting virtual programming for our alumni to keep them engaged with and connected to the university, in addition to keeping them connected to one another. I see a handful of our club leaders and committee members on this call, so thank you so much for all your efforts and what you do every year. While today's event is set in Southern California, its virtual setting allows toreros from all over the country to join us for this important and informative conversation. Thank you to those who have joined us live and those who will be watching at a later time. And speaking of watching at a later time, this event will be recorded and available on the USD Alumni Association's YouTube channel later this week. So what I'll go ahead and do is introduce Dean Norton, and then we'll get started with the presentation. So many of you know Dean Norton or probably have heard of Dean Norton. She's been the Dean of the college since 2013 and has served as a part of the faculty, or was a part of the faculty, since 1994. And previously served as Associate Dean, Co-Director of USD's Living Learning Communities program and the Director of the Honors Program, while maintaining her faculty role in the Department of Political Science and International Relations. There are a slew of wonderful things Dean Norton has done during her time at USD, and we will note some of the up-to-date things that the college is doing. Noelle's promoting of humanities as the central element of a liberal arts education, as well as her long-standing career as a USD faculty member, makes her one of USD's most cherished deans by our students, staff, and faculty. So Dean Norton, please take the stage.
Hi, I am introducing today's topic. It is diversity in television, as you know, with the guest speaker, Dr. Eric Pearson. The one thing I'm going to note is Eric is a great guy to introduce because he's a phenomenal faculty member, but he's a buddy of mine as well. I mean, we don't have that many faculty buddies from work, but he is one of them. So I'm just happy to be able to introduce him. But let me tell you a little bit about what we're doing with these different series we've been doing across the country, if you can say that, because I think people are tuning in from all over. But we've got a dedicated team in the college. You've met some of them here tonight, and they aspire to lead cultural understanding that creates a better society with all of us here. But we have a lot of work to do. So that's in part why we decided for and on this theme with these alumni roadshow events. We wanted them to be diversity related so we could explore across a wide range of topics across the nation. And I hope you're looking forward to hearing about the significance and influence and challenges in the world today with diversity, but in particular today with television and storytelling. You can get online our Diversity and Politics, our DC event. You can get Diversity in Theater, our New York event, Diversity and Science and Environmental Science, of course, the Pacific Northwest. And then we also did Diversity in Math. Where did we do that one? Chicago? Anyway, we did it somewhere.
In Northern California.
Northern California. And then we have, of course, LI and television. So you have Eric Pearson, PhD. He joined our faculty in 1999. He served as chair of the department between fall 2006 and spring 2011. That's a long bit of service, so it was great to have him there. He has worked to expand media literacy as the philosophical glue that holds together Professor Pearson's multiple strands of scholarly and creative work. He strives to create work which reflects academic rigor while also being accessible to those outside of a university setting. Professor Pearson all his work, his research appears in a wide variety of venues as he strives to reach diverse audiences. Some of the venues where you find his work are academic journals, edited book collections, film festival panels, and museum exhibitions. His essay, The Importance of Roots, is part of Watching Black, Centering the Television of Black Audiences. It's a collection of essays that focus on Black television viewership. He has been a frequent panelist and a moderator for the Eberfest, an annual film festival which continues the legacy of the film critic Roger Ebert. His historical cultural observations are part of the traveling museum installation of costumes of the Academy Award winner Ruth E. Carter. That's pretty notable. Professor Pearson's analysis provides museum patrons here insight into the historical and cultural significance of Carter's work, beginning with Do the Right Thing, 1989, through The Black Panther, 2018. So today, and that's the most important, Dr. Pearson is going to examine cable and streaming services and what their role is in creating spaces for more diversity in storytelling. He will examine how the presentation of race, social class, gender, identity, and disability have changed over the last decade and explore how these changes have impacted our understanding of the world around us. I'm very excited about this, and I'm sure you are too. Dr. Pearson.
All right, so I'm on here. Wow. So Noelle promised a lot more than I can deliver in 20 minutes, but I will, what I want to do is give us some things to think about, to give us some questions that we might want to, conversations among each other at the end of the presentation. So I guess I will start by sharing my screen. It says I can do that, but I have to do share sound. And I think that we are good to go. Just play it from the start. All right, cool. So when I was thinking about putting this together, and oftentimes when we talk about television, there's this conversation about, well, television needs to do these things. It needs to behave a certain way, and it needs to, function in a certain way that is good for the culture. And one of the first things I talk to my students about and remind them is that television is a business. And so if we want to really understand why television behaves the way it does, one of the first things that we have to recognize is that it is a business. And whenever we watch television, it's a transaction. It's a transaction of our time. In some cases, it may be a monetary transaction, depending on what kind of streaming services we might subscribe to, but it's always a transaction. It's not without costs on both sides. So when we keep that in mind, it helps us to understand why television behaves the way it does. I start by reminding us that, there's this ubiquitous nature of television. It's really easy to take it for granted. It is everywhere, right? Wherever we go, we see it. It functions in such a way that we integrate it into our lives very easily, particularly in the environment of streaming services. We don't even have to be in one place to actually have the experience, right? We can take that experience with us and have it in any number of locations. The nature of television is to sell products and lifestyles, right? To sort of inform us about who we are, what we should buy, the things that we should value. And I always remind my students that television is only conspicuous in its absence. That the only time we really notice television is when it's not there. It's like if you go to someone's house and they don't have a television, like you go like, where's your TV? Like, what do you do if you don't have a television? So if it's there, it's there. We don't see it, but if we don't see it, it's there. And I ask people, Aaron will appreciate this. People who are moving, right? When you buy a new home, think about how much time they spend going, where am I going to put the television? Because as soon as I make that important decision, then I can actually organize the rest of the room, right? So I got to make sure that television sort of occupies this primary part of our, of my space. For those of you who haven't been around a long time, I'll give you a little history of popularity of certain television shows. In the 1950s and 60s, 1950s, Gunsmoke was the most popular show during that era. And some of you might recognize and some of you may not, but people forget that Burt Reynolds used to be a cast member on Gunsmoke back in the early days of television before he became a movie star. In the 1960s, Bonanza was the most popular show on television, following the Cartwrights, who lived on the Ponderosa and dealt with sort of, life on, in the Old West. So we moved from the 50s and 60s, and then television sort of changed. Situation comedy sort of occupied the next couple of decades. In the 1970s, All in the Family was the most popular show on television. And really sort of an interesting history because it was a show that no network wanted. Norman Lear, the pilot, was rejected by more than one network before it landed on CBS. But again, from this business model, at the time that CBS decided that they could put on a show like All in the Family, the network was in last place. And they're like, well, no one's watching anyway, so let's try this show. And eventually the show became a success. The Cosby Show in the 1980s, at its peak, about 35 million people a week were tuning into the Cosby Show. That is a lot of people. When you consider that now you can be a hit television show if you can just get 6 million people a week to tune in. So the landscape in terms of who the audience is and how that audience gets fractured has changed quite a bit. If we move into the 90s, believe it or not, during the 90s, 60 Minutes was the most popular show on television, a news program. And as the sort of century turned over, American Idol, from 2000 till 2010 was the most popular show on television. I still can't figure it out what the appeal was, but reality television sort of became popular, I guess. And here we are right now. So right now, believe it or not, the most popular show on television is Sunday Night Football. And if you factor this into the question of diversity, when you look at the top 10 programs from African Americans, Asian Americans, Hispanic Americans, what you find is that Sunday Night Football is consistent across all those groups. It is the one thing that everyone can seem to agree on. So the question is, should this count as diversity? Because people are watching, should we sort of say, okay, this shows that television is heading in the right direction? And I would argue that when we raise this question of diversity, and I hope that we can sort of wrestle with this a little bit, is how we are actually going to define that. But before we do that, I have a little test for you. This is about the scope of influence of television. So I've got 6 figures here on my screen here. And anybody have any idea what they represent? Do people raise their hands? I don't know. How do you all do this? Do people raise their hands? People do just shout something. I'll start by making it easy. 121 million people, that's the number of television households that we currently have in the country, which is 121 million households. 96% of the households in America have a television. So a very small percentage of people don't watch, don't have access to television at all. 82%, any guess what the 82% is? I can't see the chat.
The cable.
Um,
Old people.
Old people. No, it's actually, Griffin, it's not. 82% of the people in this country own more than one television. That television has become this thing now, and I don't know what your living arrangement is like, but I used to ask students about like how many televisions they had in their house. And oftentimes it was more TVs than people. 3 people live in the house, but they have 5 televisions. Like, okay, well, that's 2 televisions more than you probably need. But that's what people have. 70%, and I only include this is like one of these really weird personal things. 70% of the people have a television in their bedroom. And I only include that statistic because I've been married for 30 years. And one of the first things we did was decided that no TV in the bedroom. So I've never had televisions in my married life in the bedroom, but 70% of the people do. Following up what Griffin was saying, 55% of the households have some kind of streaming service. So over half the households in this country have some sort of streaming service that they subscribe to. And the last figure I have there is 78%. 78% have 2 or more streaming services that they subscribe to. So streaming has become a real competitor to free television that people were used to, when I was growing up, which was, television was free. How should we define diversity in television? How do we know it when we see it? Should we count, and that should be content, should we just count content and characters? Should we just say, if we get these number of characters, that somehow we've reached diversity, right? That's sort of like, this is but one of the things that is worth noting, for example, a show like Blackish, which is, focuses on a Black family living in Los Angeles, almost 80% of its audience is non-Black. So even if you have characters and content, it doesn't necessarily mean that it might be fitting the needs of a specific group, right? Should we count producers and creators, right? So, because I had a question from Monique, which was about sort of the hiring process, right? Like, how do you get into the business? And when you get into the business, what does that mean? So should we just look at the people who produce content and the creators and say, regardless of the content, at least there's different kinds of people in the creative process. So maybe that counts as diversity. Should we monitor the efforts of media organizations in hiring and promotion? Clearly, a lot of organizations now have dedicated money to hiring diverse or bringing in diverse interns and hiring diverse folks. But the question is, does that lead to a difference in content, right? Like, if you're hiring people, then if you're hiring people as writers, if you say, for example, if you're Hulu and you say that we are spending $10 million to look for diverse projects, okay, then what happens when you get those projects? What is the mechanism for then bringing those projects to the audience, right? Should we let media companies just define diversity for us? Like, they will tell us what diversity is. And by that, lots of companies use algorithms to say, these are the type of programs you should watch. And so should we just let them give us things and go, okay, they seem to know who I am, and maybe that's how I should think about my diversity? Or should we just let television be television? And this gets back to, television is a business, and it has always and will continue to behave like a business, which is good news. people are like, well, maybe that's not good news. It is good news. Narrowcasting is the future. Television cannot count on the days of the Cosby Show when one show could deliver an audience of 30, 35 million people. Narrowcasting is the future, which is you need to find 5 million people who you can count on every week and cater to those people. And those people may be defined by race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, any number of criteria that you can tap into to bring people entertainment. Data. You would be surprised how much data your cable streaming services keep on you. It's why you get, my favorite thing is somehow the people at Netflix and Hulu, they've discovered that I'm a Black person. So they send me things, or they'll send me a movie that has like one Black person in it, but they'll send me a thumbnail where that one Black person is featured. And I'll, like, oh, there's a movie with a Black person in it, so maybe I'll watch it. Because a lot of people want diversity in their programming. So when you show them those thumbnails and it looks like there's some diversity, but again, the problem with that is sometimes, there'll be one Black character that's not even a main character, but they'll highlight them and the indication is that they're a main character when in fact they're hardly in the show at all. And they've sort of tricked you into watching it because they've made you think that there's diversity there that's not really there. Audience demographics are the thing that is going to make television look differently. Television cannot continue to operate without a lack of awareness as to how the demographics are changing. I have a friend who writes about colorblind casting. Maybe colorblind casting is you just cast people regardless of race or ethnicity, and you just, the story just gets told through their eyes. The problem with that is, are we ready for that as a country? Because unfortunately, we've been taught to see race as something that the story is about, even if it's not about that thing. Programming in the UK, a little bit less, well, a lot less, where they've done colorblind casting for years, where, if people happen to be different ethnicities that fall in love, then sometimes the show is not about how their cultures are clashing. It's just about the conditions in which they function as two people who just happen to be different ethnicities. But colorblind casting is certainly something that I hope that we do more of going forward. But the data is on the side of diversity. 17% of the people who are newlyweds in this country are in couples that are of mixed race. And 10% of the people who are currently married are people who are of mixed race. The president made a comment about 3 weeks ago that people sort of thought was kind of silly, but I happen to think that it was pretty perceptive. He said he was encouraged by interracial families in advertising. All right. Well, you know what? I'll do that for my last slide because I want to get to find out if people have questions. So last thing I wanted to, well, now I got to get back to that. Okay. One of the reasons why I was excited about the timing is I got the census report yesterday and I started pulling it apart, and I was really thrilled because the world is changing. Almost 20 million people were added to the country since the last census. 20% of those people identified themselves as Hispanic or Latino. 29% identified themselves as Asian. 8.5, and these are all increases from 2010 when the last time the census happened. 8.5% increase in people who identified as Black. 7.6% increase in people who identified as Native American. Again, not as impressive because it was a small group to begin with. And 30% identified themselves as two or more, as races with two or more racial identities. So the world is changing. And as the world changes, television, because it's a business, is going to have to change as well. You ask, how should the film industry balancing writing and casting diverse roles, however, not making them seem that like they're just checking the diversity hire box. I think one of the things that they have to do is, this is where I think colorblind casting comes in, where you can actually make the case to saying, look, we're just hiring the best people. Now, even if they are checking the box, so to speak, that gives people exposure. It gets people to the next job. It gets people to the next opportunity. So whenever those opportunities come, I think it's a great idea if we try to take advantage of them. But what I'd like to see is more of what we call colorblind casting, which is we're just going to hire the best people. And slowly audiences will begin to not see every casting across racial lines as about race, because sometimes it's just about the best people for the role at that time. You also asked about whitewashing and the appropriation of cultures. This is a difficult question. In light of, at some point, we are going to be such a mishmash of different cultures that it will be harder and harder for people to sort of lay claim to something specifically, because, when you see that 30% of the, there's a 30% increase of people who identify as two or more races / ethnicities, what you're starting to see is it becomes more difficult to maintain those. And sometimes, to be honest with you, sometimes I think we just have to let that stuff go. So I'll give you an example. Javier Bardem is currently playing Lucy Ricardo in a movie about Lucille Ball and Desi Arnaz. He is Spanish. He is not Cuban. There are people who certainly want to make a case that says, why wasn't a Cuban cast? I would like to make a case to say, if Javier says he wants to do my movie, then I'm probably going to go with Javier, because I'm trying to get people into see the film, into the audience. He's a recognizable talent. He's won an Academy Award. So it just, now, in terms of things like disabilities and those kinds of things, I think that Hollywood and others need to make a concerted effort to cast people who have those, who are in those situations, because they bring a certain truthfulness to the presentations.
Other questions? I see Kendra has a question.
Yeah, so sometimes I think one problem that we have, like when it comes to racism, is that people don't get to see other cultures, and the first place to do that is through media, so that you can understand people. And so my question is, why do you think that we either have, for example, like in Black culture, you have the show like Blackish, where you show like the really upper middle class Black family, or you have a show on the opposite side where you show really poor family living in the hood? Why is there no in between that makes different cultures very relatable? Because when it comes to shows that feature white people, like it allows them to be normal, or what we would call normal.
That's a really good question. I think that part of it is just it's about creating more content, right? The more content you create, the more opportunity it is for different kinds of content. Because I hear you, because personally, I am tired of Black trauma in television. Every time I see something with Black people on television, it's about trauma, right? And just like, I can't, there has to be something more to our life than our trauma. So I think the idea is that we have to move through periods of time, and then hopefully the situation will change. I think a lot of it will change because the audience is changing. Because if you look at, for example, stuff that's on the Oprah Winfrey on the old network, she has a lot, there's a lot greater variety of programming in that space. But again, it's very, I mean, it doesn't get a huge audience. And I don't think it would translate into network television or anything, but it's still there. So we should take, you know, we should be excited about the fact that it is there.
Thank you, Kendra and Dr. Pearson. Anybody other questions? Oh, I see Jared.
Yeah, so as we see the world pivoting to a streaming model, particularly a subscription streaming model, and the narrow casting approach or niche programming where you've got really targeted content to demographics and sub-demographics, are we going to see a backlash as these streaming companies use this immense data trove to tune programming more and more precisely? Are we going to create an environment where the programming has become so specific to individual member or users, subscribers, that we get the same effect that we have on social media, where your whole world is just an echo chamber of things that the algorithm has decided you should see or believe in? And if so, how do we combat that phenomenon?
I agree with you that we're heading in that direction. I mean, the way in which they can pinpoint data, even so this cross-referencing, right? Where I'm not only am I watching, but they have data from my cell phone company that says, well, Eric's got the TV on, but he's not really watching, right? Like, and so that I do think it will become so specific, but I don't know if people will really recognize it. They will recognize it as having their needs met and not necessarily about what they're not seeing. I play a game with myself, which I tell my students that they should try to do, so I don't fall into that echo chamber. I say on Friday night, sometimes I turn on Netflix and I said, I am going to watch whatever is number 5 today. Whatever's number 5 on their most popular thing, I'm going to watch that. And it's been kind of interesting because it forces you to see things that you're like, I don't know if I'm interested in that. And occasionally you come across things that are very interesting. But I agree with you that it's this whole thing about narrowing the focus, and you know, Eric is interested in this and Jared is interested in this kind of programming, you know, is, you know, but what happens when you're not the only person, when you live in a household with 2 or 3 different, you know, with 2 generations who are living together. So and here's the thing, and we're paying for it. I mean, right, that limiting experience, we're actually paying for with our subscriptions. So I don't know.
Thank you, Eric. We're going to take one more question, and maybe 1.5, because I have a short one. So,
Okay.
Yeah, Chanel.
Hi, Eric. Thank you. I have a quick question. You mentioned earlier about how we need to hire more diverse, but I think the issue is people that are hiring, and you mentioned that it should be the best person, but do you feel like there's a change in the people hiring being also people who are diverse, or from people of color? Because I think that's a huge problem, is that the people that are doing hiring don't think certain people are the best because they don't understand them, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no. I get that. I think there are a couple of things too that I think give me optimism. One is simply the scope of the amount of content that's being produced, that there's just way more jobs out there in the industry than there were 20 years ago in terms of, you know, people getting opportunities, right? That filmmakers are, and people who produce television are saying, I need good people. Where can I find them? So they're looking in places where they hadn't looked before. And I think that part is encouraging. And once you get those opportunities, because oftentimes people are like, well, I won't hire you because you don't have enough experience. And you're like, well, how am I going to get any experience if you won't hire me? So, oftentimes people figure out ways to work with their friends, right? Their friends do projects together and they become, they do the set to decoration. And so they are able to get those experiences that way. But I'm optimistic that simply the volume forces us to think more collectively and more creatively about where we go to find talent. But the other part of that, as I mentioned before, how do we decide if we've achieved diversity? Is the ultimate goal diversity in the type of programming that you see, or is it in the people making the decisions, or some combination of both? Because oftentimes people don't necessarily deliver what we would call diverse content, even though they may be from a diverse group. So, that's a difficult thing to balance. So Noelle, I guess you're going to get the last question.
No, actually, Megan and I both have a separate question. So,
okay.
But we're taking control for just a second. I'm going to ask, so did you see Bridgerton? And
I did.
What did you think of Bridgerton?
I thought that she spent a lot of Netflix money. No, the show was very well done. A great example of colorblind casting.
That's what I was asking.
Yeah, I think a great example of color, but the other part of that, it'll be interesting to see how that moves forward, because it still is based on a series of novels, so she has a certain responsibility to be truthful to the novels, and I don't know how that will influence going forward. But the issue is she could have never gotten ABC to allow her to do that show.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, it's very expensive. Streaming services, one of the things that streaming services, I do know where they get all this money from. They get all this money because people pay every month and then they don't watch, right? Like literally they collect people. I mean, the fact that, and Amazon is a different beast, but, $500 million to produce the Lord of the Rings series that they're doing is just a huge amount of money to commit. And again, here's the thing, ratings don't matter. It's not like they're fighting for ratings, whereas in the case of Netflix and Bridgerton, they weren't fighting for ratings either. So she had a lot of flexibility. That would have been a harder sell if she was still working at ABC. But it's also one of the reasons why she's not working at ABC is because streaming services have deep pockets and they give their people lots of creative freedom.
Very last question before I give college updates, which are going to be super quick. They won't take more than a minute. But your question should be even 10 seconds, because we want you to do it as fast as you do your roulette. Pick the Netflix, number 5. What TV show do you recommend to this group right now, this second?
Sex Education on Netflix.
I've seen it. I already win. Okay.
Great show. Well written, honest, and a great example of colorblind casting.
Okay. Thank you. Megan, do you want me to do the college updates now?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So very quickly, I hope you can see that the college is really committed to, of course, like Jared said, the liberal arts education. And even if you're from the School of Business, School of Education, any other school, engineering, it doesn't matter what your major is. Your foundation is in USD's liberal arts. It comes from the very ethos of the place. But at the core is this work towards eliminating racial inequity. So I want to take this opportunity to tell you what we're doing in the college for inclusion and diversity efforts. So over the past 2 semesters, the college has a new interdisciplinary course taught by, I don't know if you know her, Dr. Jillian Tullis and Dr. Mei Fu. Well, wait, they don't teach it, they coordinate it. There are 20 faculty from across all the different schools running this through our Humanities Center. And the name of the course is Black Lives Matter, interdisciplinary approaches. The class has filled, it's been remote, of course, so it's filled with over 70, 100 people, and we're going to keep teaching that into the future. So it's a course that has an in-depth insight into the history and culture of Black people in the United States. So there's one big effort that we've picked up, and we're going to continue. The college has also launched a new project to create the first College Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Transformational Award, which will recognize staff and faculty who have demonstrated some remarkable achievements in promoting anti-racism in the college. And of course, that means for all of USD, we're going to award that for the first time ever on May 7th. So the announcement will be in a week. And then finally, the last announcement I have is beginning next fall, the college launches a new Africana Studies minor, which will discuss, describe, and debate the many contributions of Black people from around the globe. So these are really big changes for us, and I'm excited to announce them. I want to thank you for attending. I hope that this provided some insight into the work that Dr. Eric Pearson is doing and that he does for communication studies and for the field of film studies. He started a new film studies minor. I don't think we talked about that.
No, we didn't, but but before you say goodbye, I do want to share my new favorite people, because I think I've gotten this fixed now. So thank you all. It has been so cool to see some of you who I had as students. I miss you all. And of course you miss me. I told you you'd miss my lectures one day. So I'm glad that you were able to attend. So let me see, I'm gonna share my screen, and I think I can make this work now. So let's share. Yes,
Pause
can you
jerky.
see it now?
We have to stop.
Beef jerky! Dad, this is far.
Wow, we are really out here.
You guys are gonna love this.
Hot! Hot!
What is this?
Hot!
It says TNT.
We need milk!
All right, I'm gonna get us some milk.
Take a family off-road trip in the new Santa Fe with H-Track all-wheel drive.
That's a big change, Eric.
And this family is part of a whole advertising campaign. So they're in 2 ads right now. And I think that it really does show that businesses see that the world is changing. And so they're my new favorite TV show, is just watching them go across the country in their Santa Fe.
And look at the chat. Griffin thinks you should be talking about Down to Earth with Zac Efron. And then Megan, it's up to you. You're on.
Thank you, Dr. Pearson and Dean Norton. That was so informative, interesting. I think I can speak on behalf of everyone on this call that we could probably be here for another half an hour, but we want to be respectful of everyone's time. So thank you so much for leading us through that. If you'd like to connect with Dean Norton or Dr. Pearson further on anything that was discussed today, we will include their information on the thank you email to this event. We will also include some more information on getting involved with the Alumni Association, supporting the College of Arts and Sciences, specifically the Communications Studies Department, and then also information to get connected with your local Torero Club. We've saw that a lot of people from all over the country are on this call, and we have about 23 that are all over the country for you to be involved with if you'd like. So once again, thank you so much for joining today's event, and we all hope that you have a great rest of your evening. Take care, everyone, and we hope to see you soon.